Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So this is going to be dedicated to the new lore now in the Warzone Nachman conflict. We are indeed returning to Vigilus. A lot of stuff has happened. I want to say a big shout out to Chikaius as always. Without him, this video would not be possible. Please go and check out his Reddit linked in the description of this video. So let's jump in and let's get talking. So let's start with a brief summary. The first Chaos invasion of Vigilus ended with a mighty duel between Abaddon and Calgar. Though Calgar fought heroically, he could not overcome the warp-infused might of the War Master. Calgar was struck down and left on death's door, but his selfless sacrifice bought enough time for the Eldari stealth ship to ram into the vengeful spirit. The stockpile of void missiles aboard the Eldari ship detonated, resulting in a warp rent that ate away at the vengeful spirit, causing the shipmaster to make an emergency warp translation in her panic. Seeing that the ship was much more of a symbol of his authority as the Talon of Horus, Abaddon was forced to quit the field to secure it. Abaddon's departure saved Vigilus from being overrun by Chaos hordes. However, not all Chaos warbands left with their War Master. Many remained behind to fight on. The Orcs too continued their fight, and in doing so are dominating the planet's wastes. While from the shadows, the Genestealer cult's campaign has only just begun. The war for Vigilus was truly far from over. But the worst was yet to come. The war for Vigilus turned into a war for the entire sector, creating Warzone Nachman. Drawn by the instinct for a good fight, Orc warbands flooded into the sector, overrunning entire worlds in gleeful rampages. The Gene cults began massed uprisings across the sector, sapping Imperial strength and even managing to conquer some of the sector's worlds. Exploiting this mayhem, the Dark Eldar compounded the suffering of the sector by enacting their own campaign of atrocity and horror. The Eldar of Beltan launched strikes into the war zone, but these strikes seem to be directed at destabling each of the centres of the Imperial resistance, rather than aiding them. The collective anarchy and bloodshed caused by these threats prevented the Imperial reinforcements that poured in from both sides of the gauntlet from ensuring victory. More than half of the sector's worlds fell, and what remained would soon feel the wrath of Abaddon's innumerable traitor ships that raced towards them. Though some fell to madness and despair in the face of such horrors, the defenders of the Nachman fought harder than ever. The relentless war and adversity fanned the fires of their faith into an inferno, for even in the darkest hours, the Emperor protects. So starting with Chapter 1. After Abaddon's departure from Vigilus, the majority of the Loyalist Marines, including Calgar, left the planet to aid neighbouring systems. They were there to fortify and defend them from the onrushing hordes of Abaddon's forces to limit the traitor reinforcements funneling towards Vigilus. Now, one of the systems that led to the Vigilus system was that of Yelaris. It was faced by a massive Chaos fleet that seamlessly emerged from the Great Rift itself. In its defense, the Ecclesiarchy launched a crusade of Maynard's Consecration. A vast and well-armed fleet of the faithful made its way to the system. Inside of this vast fleet were thousands of battle sisters that formed the heart of this crusade. Their strength was supplemented by countless pennant engines, emperor-worshipping murder cultists, and much more forms of the faithful. The ecclesiastical pastor that recruited them called them his Fratale Militaria. They were actually kept away from the sisters because there was a lot of confrontations between the groups. Now, despite being in an area of space that was made dangerous by the swell and rage of the Great Rift, they actually had a safe journey towards the system. The sisters attributed the good fortune to their faith. However, it would not last. The warp began to rage around their crusade ships as they neared the system's edge. The Great Rift expanded and consumed the system. 3 of the Crusade's navigators were killed, their third eyes bursting from unspeakable things they saw in the depths of the warp. The surviving navigators screamed that they could hear the death cries of billions of souls that lived on Yularis. The entire system was lost, either torn apart by the warp or claimed by chaos. Half of the Crusade ships were lost. The crashing waves of the warp shattered their Geller fields and smashed their ships to pieces. More and more ships were lost as the Crusade suffered through the rage of the warp for months. With the golden light of terror blotted out by the storms, the desperate Crusade navigators fixed their sights on the faint light and directed their ships towards it. Now, because of the growing storms, the Crusade of Minas Consecration was the first of many Imperial forces that arrived at Vigilus following Calgar's fall. Having been denied the blood of the heretics on Yularis and seeing an Imperial world besieged by the mutant, the heretic, and the alien, the Crusade vented their fury in full. They blasted their way through the Orc and traitor vessels in orbit and began their landing. Now, there was already sisters fighting on Vigilus, and with the arrival of the new sister forces, they linked up. This combined army took the fight to the traitor marines. The viciousness and the zeal of this counterattack pushed the heretic marines further and further south. The defenders of Vigilus took heart from the sisters' example and redoubled their effort in their battles. Eventually, the traitor marines were unable to withstand the mounting pressure and fled before the Imperial onslaught to the wastes beyond the hives. Arriving with these reinforcements was also an Inquisitor called Eramis. He actually arrived with his elite warrior group of the Black Iconoclasts and began his operation. His investigation was delayed by the fear and doubt caused by his presence. The Admech of Vigilus feared that he was there to punish them for their excavation and use of abundant blackstone deposits on Vigilus, so sharing of information took some time as the priest filtered any data that might be used against them. In the end, the Inquisitor got what he wanted and pinpointed the location of his target, the Noctilith Crown. Commandeering an Astra Militarian regiment, the Inquisitor threw it at the Crown cultist defenders. Most of the guardsmen died in the attack, but it revealed the areas of strength in the defences of the heretics. This information helped his personal Black Iconoclasts in their flanking manoeuvre. They dismantled the cultist defences and broke them. While the last of these heretics were hunted down, the Inquisitor strode before the Noctilith Crown and began incantating the rites of unbinding from his skin-bound book of demonic lore. Moving on to chapter 2. As the Inquisitor unmade the power of the crown, he received a vision. There were more Noctilith crowns than he had expected. They formed a ley line of network of dark energy. He couldn't go after all of them himself, so he split his forces into secret armies and sent them on the hunt. Moreover, he recruited battered strike forces of Imperial Fists on the planet and mission battle sisters for this task, though he did not share with them the true nature of their target. If they somehow uncovered it, he would ensure they were dealt with. The Inquisitor moved to Highsprawl Storval, the location of the nexus of the Crown network. Within this hive, there was a demon forge from which the crowns were being created and then dispatched to key locations across the planet. The warp rift at its heart fed on the planet's lifeblood, fusing geomatic energies with the power of the warp to create these crowns. It had to be stopped. The Imperial forces in Storval were in disarray, so the Inquisitors took swift and ruthless action upon arriving. He ordered his men to grab any Imperial officer they could find and place them into torture machines that were erected before the Great Hive gates. The Inquisitor then broadcasted the fate of these officers and his own words to the defenders of Storval. He told them that these wretches were not the exemplars of humanity. If they were, they would have led them to victory in the Hive. He then went on and explained that Noble Calgar sacrificed his life for victory, and every Imperial soul should do no less. The Inquisitor's words and actions whipped the Imperial forces into a frenzy of fear and zeal. Those who failed to march in his army were offered the full tender mercy of the Inquisition. Within the hour, a ragtag crusade formed around the Inquisitor, made from guardsmen, companies of Skitarii, battle sisters, and Imperial knights that crushed foe and ally in their hurried charge to the front. Many fell in the march due to the hazardous conditions of the Hive Spall and hundreds of enemy attacks, but the ragtag crusade numbers swelled as more and more of Storval's citizens and soldiers joined the march. With Abaddon's departure, it broke whatever pretense of unity the traitors had, so they stood little chance against an Imperial army united by fear. The champions of chaos fought amongst themselves even as the Inquisitor's growing army swept over them and crushed them. The Crusade's momentum was only slowed by the deployment of demon engines and a horde of possessed cultists. It was then that the Inquisitor and his black iconoclasts took to the field. Using his psychic powers and diabolical lore, the Inquisitor tore the heart from the demonically possessed horde. The sight of the Inquisitor among them fueled the Loyalists' desperate fighting spirit as they strove to be seen fighting by the Inquisitor. With this, the last centre of the traitor resistance in Storval was broken. The warpsmiths that forged could not flee in time and had their corpses fed to their own demon engines. As the Inquisitor began his ritual that would close the warp rift that fueled the forge, the black iconoclast began rounding up the Crusade survivors. Chapter 3. Through a web of half-truths, lies and inspiring tales, the Inquisitor united Vigilus armies to his cause. The reinvigorated Imperial armies began seeking out the Noctilith crowns. Swift successes in this endeavour were rare and thus frustrated the Inquisitor. For every delay, the traitors erected more crowns to replace the ones that were destroyed. As more and more Imperial forces were redirected for this task, this exposed other fronts to be overrun by Xenos and other heretical forces, ensuring even victory came at a high cost. Despite the heavy losses and delays, the Inquisitor's plan reaped a growing tally of successes, and the Imperials remained ignorant of the true purpose of this war. They ascribed their victories to his beneficence of the Emperor and Saint Calgar and their own conviction in the Imperial Creed. Their defeats, the few that were covered up, were blamed on a lack of faith or sins against the Emperor. The Inquisitor noted that as the faith and devotion grew and spread on Vigilus, the stability of real space in the system increased. The grip of insanity, despair and horror felt by those who fought beneath the gaze of the Great Rift lessened. The Inquisitor knew that his war had helped on Vigilus, but he couldn't attribute all this to his efforts. The Inquisitor in his heart knew that the Emperor was drawn by the growing devotion on Vigilus, his holy power and majesty lifting the pall that plagued its defenders. Chapter 4. The sacrifice of Saint Calgar inspired the formation of martyrdom cults all over Vigilus. They preached that salvation lies on the blades of their enemies, and that only in glorious and brutal death would they earn the Emperor's mercy. The cult's numbers were swelled by the new arrivals on the planet, those Imperial forces and refugees that were drawn by Vigilus's beacon. They were shoveled into a new sacrificial war. When Celestine herself manifested in Hive Hyperia, the martyrdom cultists were driven into a rapture and religious paroxysm. They flooded in their hundreds of thousands to be seen fighting and dying by the manifested deity. These undisciplined militia did not slow the Black Legion advances. The traitor Marines merely marched through them, rarely wasting ammunition on them. It was more disciplined troops led by Celestine that proved to be a challenge. Motivated by the Saint's presence and the martyrdom of so many of the faithful masses, the warriors of the Imperium fought with legendary heroism and bravery. Eventually, the tides turned and the remaining Black Legionnaires quit the field. On the face of each one of the tens of thousands of the Imperials that lost their lives in this battle was a buphonic riches of joy. Joy at fighting by the side of Saint Celestine. After the battle, Celestine met with the canoness leading the Sisters of Vigilus. She tasked her to purge the hive sprawl of Dontaria. The saint told them that Dontaria and the entire false continent had fallen to sorcery and corruption. Their people were lost, consumed by the corruption of the plague god. The sisters took the holy mission with zeal and unbreakable determination. They burst into the plague hives and brought fire and sword to countless masses of poxwalkers. The remaining sister ships sailed to low orbit and sent lance after lance and building-sized incendiary munitions ahead of the sisters' purgation. It didn't take long until the firestorms consumed the entirety of the hives. The whole false continent was consumed by flame. The conflagration could be seen from the horizons of neighbouring continents and even from space. The fate of Vigilus. The fractured Imperial Command began to reunite and organise, bringing sorely needed discipline and order to the armies of Vigilus. Though they dreaded how they could maintain such a fanatic zeal among their troops, they also feared the possibility of Abaddon's return. For now, the planet was under Imperial control. Due to the surge of faith, Imperial church priests and sisters of battle wielded more influence than Admech on the planet's nobles. The Space Marines on Vigilus, except that of the Black Templars, were unsettled by the surge of faith, but they too felt the strengthening of their spirits. Many of their numbers had fallen to achieve victory, even Calgar himself. The inspired Marines now swore oaths to the glorious dead, as much as their chapter ideals. Hyperia Hivespawn, the place where Calgar fell, became the world's capital and centre of Imperial authority. Though vast swathes of its outlying districts were contested by Orc commandos, heretic marines and gene cultists, the central hive cities were secure. The fires of Dontaria continued to burn, fed by the corpse gases, chemical vapours and industrial fuel. The sisters stacked bodies of poxwalkers in piles that were as tall as buildings. Nothing above the ground of Dontaria lived. However, beneath the ground, there were those that survived the Chaos Plagues and the Sisters' Purges. The gene cultists of Dontaria emerged from the underground and reunited with their brethren in other hive sprawls. The Gene Stealer cults rejoiced at this reunion, seeing it as a great blessing from the Star Children. They welcomed the Dontaria cultists into their nests, not knowing that they carried the plague in their bodies. The Orc ships on Vigilus were efficiently rendered to scrap metal by endless fighting, stranding the Orc hordes on Vigilus. This didn't bother the Orcs, for few wished to leave the planet and its endless feast of violence and bloodshed. The Orc scrap cities continued to grow larger and multiple in the wastes, producing wave after wave of Orc ramshackle Orc vehicles. The Orcs discovered an ancient human fortress hidden in the wastes and began turning it into a formidable Orc bastion. The Gene Stealer cults were unable to explain why the Star Children didn't come to save them after years of fighting the oppressors. Seeing it as more trial and test by their saviours, the Genestealer cultists concluded they must find the means to spread themselves to other systems. In addition to this, the Gene cultists drew plans to exploit the reinsurgence of the Imperial faith. Though subtle, the corruption of Vigilus may yet fall into the hands of the cults. Though the Imperial commanders are exploiting the resurgence of faith and the flood of refugees to fight back against the onrushing tide of traitors, the traitors have superior numbers. As per Abaddon's orders, the Black Legion and their allies within the system continue to assail Vigilus and its neighbouring worlds. They would conquer Vigilus for the War Master or die in the attempt. As for Abaddon himself, though he wanted to punish the planet for having the audacity to survive this long against his forces, the planet was nothing more than an irritation now, as he focused on his wider strategic plans for the Nachmund Gauntlet. With his piece all in motion, he sailed south of the Gauntlet towards Darovar. And that is what we have for the new lore in summary Nachmund Gauntlet, Vigilus alone. Thank you for coming, thank you for watching this video, or should I say listening to this video. If you've got any thoughts, feedback, anything like that, post it down below and we can have a nice talk down there. Once again, thank you to Shakaius for doing this write-up. Without him, this would not be possible. His link is included in the description of this video. Please go over there, give him a thumb up, give him a like, tell him he is amazing. See ya, have a great day, and bye-bye.